Great. Okay, let's start. So before we, start, some few housekeeping items. I would say one is, this recording is going to be sent to all the attendees after the webinar, and also make sure that if you want to comment or ask questions, change your Zoom chat settings to everyone. Also, if you'd like to hear more about Gable or find us, we're going to be in Hornet this weekend, and also our next webinar is on November 29th. So without further ado, welcome everyone, and welcome to our amazing speakers. I'd love for each of you to introduce yourself. Brittany, I'll start with you.
Great. Thank you so much for having me today. Really excited to talk about this topic. My name is Brittany Perini. I'm the Global Director of Workplace Design and Experience at Harness. I have been in workplace experience and facilities and real estate for the past 13 years in various startups, really focusing on building out office spaces, but building them in meaningful ways to support our employees across DEIB and our various company cultures.
Charlotte.
Hi, everyone. I'm Charlotte Johnson. I lead the workplace team at Upwork. I have been working in workplace for 9 years. And in my time at Upwork, have been very lucky to build a lot of our office spaces and really design the office operations and a lot of, team member facing programs. And super excited for this topic. I think it's such an exciting time to be talking about this right now. So thank you for having me.
I agree. Great. So let's start with a little bit of an icebreaker question for everyone. Where was your first office and what was it like? Charlotte, I'll start with you.
I love this question. My first office job was at a law firm, and it was in a high-rise building, beautiful building in downtown San Francisco. So I got a little bit spoiled with the views and just being in the hustle and bustle every day. It was a great sort of first job out of college experience.
How about you?
Similar to Charlotte, mine was in a high-rise in San Francisco on Mission.
Wow.
And it was for, at the time, a very small startup. And so it had that very startup-y feel of, big open space with desks and kind of hodgepodge. So it looked like, they had obviously either acquired furniture from the space or purchased their own in the middle of it. So you had various areas of, some were old cubes, but some were brand new fancy sit desks. And it was really, really fun. It was my very first ever corporate role. And so learning the ropes through that very interesting office space was pretty fun.
Amazing. Mine was actually in Israel, in Haifa. I used to live in Tel Aviv, but I got my first job at Haifa at Microsoft. And whoever of you know a little bit about Israel geography, basically I had to commute 2 hours to get to that office, which was not fun. That's one. Two, it was definitely not high rise. It was a pretty crappy location with I didn't have any windows, and I was like close to the bathroom. But I did, climb up the food chain after that. So my experience was not a high rise in SF. I wish it was, but now I think it's much better. That's great. So cool. Okay, so a little bit about Gable. So we are the operating system for the modern workplace. We partner with amazing companies that are basically trying to figure out what hybrid and flex means in this new world, both in terms of providing flexibility to employees to work from anywhere, but also providing workplace and people leaders full visibility and control over their distributed workforce. Great. A little fun data point, I would say. I'm an engineer by training, so numbers is my safe place, I would say. So this is a really interesting data point that shows that well, employees love coming to an office, but not for the office. This is actually for collaborating with more people and employees. So the reason why people are coming is not the office, it's just other people, which is not really surprising, right? However, I would say what people don't really like, and I'm sure a lot of people have workplace leaders and people leaders are hearing, and maybe from leadership, is let's bring everyone back, right? Let's make sure that we have collaboration as much as possible, those aha moments as much as possible, but actually it doesn't really work. Having mandates can cause to backlash. We've even seen that companies are using this in order to reduce their workforce. So definitely this is, at least in my opinion, not the answer. However, there are other things that we can offer our workforce, like flexibility. However, flexibility is a loosely held term, I would say, and everyone would interpret a bit differently. And this is also one of the things I've learned since I came to the States, is that one word can have different meanings, and I think here flexibility can also say the same, and different populations can think about flexibility differently. Different generations can think about flexibility differently in the workplace. Even us as employers, we use flexibility to hire the best talent. Also, we use it to be able to reduce our real estate footprint and reinvest it into our people. So this is also part of flexibility. And what it creates is a spectrum, right? It's very interesting to see that in the past 3 years, if prior to COVID, everyone were in this, always in office category, we have a plethora of options right now, where most of companies are probably gonna land in the middle area of hybrid, whether this is managed hybrid or flex hybrid. I'm sure we're going to talk about this here as well. So I want to open this as a poll question to the audience. What is your current workplace policy? Okay, I think we can stop the poll. Already see, oh, very interesting results. Hybrid days vary each day, and prescribed days. So very much aligned, I would say, in what we've seen in the bell curve, even though I do see quite a lot of fully remote. So interesting, very interesting. One last thing that I would like to share here, and I would love both Brittany and Charlotte to comment, is a little bit about the workplace strategy that Harness and Upwork have created. So let's start with Charlotte, if you want to share a little bit about the current workplace strategy.
Yeah, thank you. So our workplace strategy is called Remote First, and that's a very intentional name because we think of remote work as the default for all of our team members, regardless of location. So we offer access to physical workspace as needed. And we decided to retain office space in San Francisco and Chicago, which is where we have our biggest concentrations of employees. But our culture and operations is really centered around this assumption that most people are working remotely most of the time. And that makes it, easier in some ways to craft policies that will work for everyone. Although, of course, we measure how, different subsets of our population are engaging with various components of our work ecosystem. We really like to anchor on that remote first model and really focus in on making that successful.
Brittany, how about you?
Our policy or strategy here at Harness is what we like to call destination first. So we are about to roll out a kind of hybrid work model for being in offices, and we do have 7 dedicated offices worldwide, to come in 3 days a week for those that live within a certain parameter within that city location. And also offering kind of a mix of co-working, short-term lease spaces, and flex space bookings to further develop our meaningful moments and gatherings, and ensuring that people are coming together, even if we aren't providing a dedicated office in their location. We're still hoping to bring them together at meaningful moments throughout their working life.
So I like that you call this differently, right? But at the end of the day, it sounds pretty similar, right? Which is interesting how, again, if we look at the bell curve, it is also aligned there, I would say. Question to both of you: how have you came to this conclusion that this is what works for the workforce? What was the I'm sure that there was an iterative process to get to this. So I would love to hear from you. How did you land on this? And how are you testing this, right? Brittany, let's start with you.
So our strategy is actually going into place next week as kind of a new version of this strategy, and this very much a focus of destination first. So starting next Wednesday, we are bringing people together in those dedicated office spaces 3 days a week, and kicking off our co-working and flex booking capabilities for our remote employees. So right now for us, it's very kind of up in the air in terms of, whether it's successful or what's working well or not. We have come to this conclusion with knowing that collaboration has really been more productive when in person, and we've tested it out with certain departments over the past year. And so with seeing that productivity increase and that engagement increase within those specific departments, the executive team really felt that it was time to bring more people back. And we have finally built out all of those office spaces and revamped for a return to office. So it felt like the right time for us.
How about you?
Well, just Brittany, I love that approach of testing and really being, data driven. That's awesome. I would say that for Upwork, we have always been a remote work company. That's our product. And we really, it's at the, the center of the spirit of everything that we do. And so even prior to the pandemic, we actually employed some flexible work arrangements and always have hired remote employees and remote team members. And so our office, it still was largely office centric. But we actually did things like we did work online Wednesdays every Wednesday, where the entire company would work online from home or from wherever you wanted to work. And so, and then, at the, to the chagrin of my team, the workplace team, we had a lot of team members who would just kind of work from home whenever they needed to. And so it made it difficult for things like catering or planning around that, but it was very flexible and very remote friendly. And so we were lucky to have a lot of the infrastructure in place already when the pandemic hit. And we immediately all had to work from home. We kind of knew how to do that. We had started building some of those muscles already. So it really, just cemented kind of what we had already known, the direction that we were already moving in, which is that we want to step into the shoes of our customers and really, live that remote work model. And so it was an easy decision for us, and one that we can, feel really strongly behind. And I think it helps us when we encounter challenges, because we know we have a really strong North Star that's driving all of our decision making.
And it's interesting because, I would say Upwork definitely well positioned before, but Brittany, was Harness positioned before to do this, like prior to COVID? Were you remote, hybrid, or was it an in-office culture? And the reason I'm asking, and I hear this all the time, it's like, if it was the decision of my CEO, everyone would be in the office 5 days a week, but we cannot. So we are landing on something flexible. I wanted to get your feedback on that, and what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, prior to the pandemic, the company was mainly office-based with a handful of remote employees, very typical startup life.
Yeah.
And the pandemic obviously threw that completely out the window. And when I had joined 2 years ago, everyone was remote. We had offices, some were open, they had just opened, and no one was going in, and it was fine. And it was okay. The leases were starting to expire when I joined, so it was a whole kind of revamp of what is workplace going to look like, not only for my team and our work and what we do, but for the company at large. And so over the past 2 years, it's really taken us that much time to get to kind of where we are today in terms of this next iteration of a work life for Harness.
Well, question to both of you. What do you see in terms of challenges? Like flexibility is a great thing to offer, but what we see, at least, there are a lot of operational challenges. That's one. So you both nodding, so clearly it resonates. So would love to talk about operational challenges and any other challenges in terms of even communication with employees. Like at the end of the day, you are iterating. It's like a product that you're iterating. So maybe walk me through any challenges that you had or currently having with maintaining this flexible work environment. Let's say, who wants to start?
I can start. Experience. I think one main challenge is with this iteration and with the different needs of both the business and our employees, it's really hard to juggle and maintain a balance of what the business wants and what leadership wants to see and what our employees really need and want from us. I think for my team, we were all in office. We knew what we were doing. It had been the same for however many years. The pandemic hit. We were all home. That threw us into a completely different world. We got used to that world. And now we're back into a brand new world where we are trying to manage people in office and also remote employees at home. And what those different employee sets need from workplace specifically and what they want. And it's hard when we're offering something in one office or in an office environment that we can't offer you remotely, and starting to feel that kind of back and forth pull that we had pre-pandemic of, well, I'm a remote employee, but everybody gets these perks in the office. Why can't I have the same perk? Or why am I not allowed to fly out to the office for this event when you're throwing something together? We're starting to see that trickle back in with this kind of flex hybrid work model that is I think going to be a kind of a continued conversation within our leadership department.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that Brittany shared. I think, two primary challenges stood out to me. What came to mind when I was thinking about this. One is that, with flexibility comes, people will be having different work experiences, right? People may be in the office some days, people may be at home. To Brittany's point, people may be attending events in person or they may be attending remotely. And so you really have to, I think, as an organization, your leadership, your workplace team, your org effectiveness team, you have to think about and really invest in creating really clear ways of working, documented standards, work practices, values, and working principles, all of those things that kind of tell, team members how to work within the context of your organization, regardless of location. And even sometimes calling attention to those differences in location, like tailoring guidance, for hybrid meetings, for example, and how we approach those. And I think the other challenge too is that, employees can feel disconnected from their colleagues if they're working remotely. That's just a fact. And so you have to be very intentional about bringing people together in person periodically. I think that's so important. It's something that we are investing in heavily. And you have to create pathways for people to network and build relationships and build trust and socialize informally. So, it doesn't come naturally. You have to really work at it and really build those programs that enable it. And I think that, any company with, a hybrid or remote model is probably looking to invest heavily in those two areas.
It's very interesting. I think that, well, we see it a lot is the shift of one, this is not like, oh, you have an office, come whenever you want, that's fine. This is more like, those are the programs. Why should you come? There needs to be an intention towards that. We see a lot of, on-sites, off-sites, basically, also for either the remote population or the hybrid population, but the intentionality is a common thread. And there is even a question from the audience, which I really resonate, and I think it's a huge challenge right now, is that you have a significant amount of remote employees, a distributed workforce. How do you keep them still engaged, feeling connected, especially people that, like even Brittany, started in COVID, basically. How do you maintain connection, collaboration, even culture and sense of belonging when you are distributed? And you're not equal at the end of the day. That's how it feels, right? So it's a loaded question, but who wants to tackle it first? And I'm sure there are a lot of other things to unpack here.
I'm happy to go first. Yeah, it is a loaded question, and I think it's something that we're still learning, right, as we go with this. I would say that there are a few areas that you can really focus on. One is that in-person gathering, program, or a really systematic way to make sure that people have those opportunities, and that we're giving those opportunities equitably to a degree. Some teams will gather in person more than others, and that's natural. But I think it's important to still make sure that people understand how you're making decisions, and that it feels equitable and transparent and fair, and that people have those opportunities to meet their team in person. I think it's really important. And then I think, because most people are remote most of the time, that is where Upwork has really invested in building cultural and engagement programs, whether that's through belonging communities or Slack channels or virtual events. For example, we host our onboarding completely virtually. I know a lot of companies do it completely in person, which I also think is a really cool way to do it. For us, ultimately, we felt like it's easier for people in their first week to be at home. And it helps us really just level the playing field and give a really great experience across the board when people are joining the company. And then that's reinforced through, onboarding buddies and other mechanisms for people to have meet and greet roadmaps during their onboarding process. So there's, a number of different methods that we're piloting and just continuously gathering feedback and seeing what's working.
I agree with Charlotte, and a lot of what Charlotte is doing, we're doing as well. And I think, the other piece that I see and that I experienced firsthand, having started in the midst of COVID in my home, is manager enablement and ensuring that managers are really helping to drive that connection. For myself, I know I really heavily leaned on my manager to make sure that I not only felt connected, but I was getting regular feedback or regular communications of just ensuring I was on the right page with not only my onboarding, but what the expectations were of me as an employee of Harness and of the people and places team. And I think many people lean on their manager for a lot of that, because it is your first point of contact when you're starting. So that manager enablement piece is huge, and it's such a big undertaking, but it is so important, I think, to build that very quick initial connection, and then to continue with as equitable as possible are those hybrid events, those virtual events for those that are fully remote, the in-office moments, and as much as a company can is putting resources to bringing people together in person, whether that is for a company event or for flex working in a city that they've got a congregation of employees on an ad hoc basis.
Yeah, and the question here, there at least what we see is there are two approaches. One is there's a top-down approach, leadership wants X, Y, Z, or employees want XYZ and we're trying to figure it out. What resonates with you more? Is it more, employees are thinking that we need more, in person, or they want more flexibility? Let's find a program to retain them, or this is a business decision, right? We want to increase productivity, so we want people more in the office and together. What resonates more with you? Brittany, let's start with you.
Truly for us, it's quite a mix. One of our values is remember the human. And so we are very regularly communicating with our employees, getting feedback both through formal culture and for employee engagement surveys to more anecdotal feedback and meeting with them one-on-one to kind of help drive our decisions. At the same time, we hear from the executive team, what they want. And so we're essentially bridging the gap between the two groups and going, we hear both sides. Here's actually what we suggest and what we think would work best. And here are different alternatives as well to kind of somewhere get as much into the middle as possible.
Yeah, I agree. It's a mix of, I think, the things that we try to get from team members from the bottom, and then the things that we try to drive top down. Because I think, like Brittany said, the best way is to kind of figure out sort of how you come to that happy medium, that right balance. And so I think for us, we really started with flexibility and choice and autonomy, bottom up. And then from the top down, we really wanted to drive clarity and, increase operational productivity and enable team members to do their best work from home or asynchronously through like a really clear point of view and, documented sort of playbook for how we can effectively work together so that, although we're not co-located, we can remain really tightly aligned and connected. And I think, we took a similar approach too, where we gathered feedback from team members constantly. And one of the things that we actually heard in our last company pulse survey was this request for more in-person get-togethers. And I think people are really craving, that time to get together. So that was an area that we just immediately focused on because it was such a clear opportunity for us. So I think, like Brittany, we've done a mix of surveys, focus groups, really honing in if we feel like there's an area that we want to investigate further. And then I think just, when we're communicating with team members, we can make sure that we lead with, this is what we heard from you. This is what we're doing. We want to hear from you more. We're working on this together. So it's kind of a co-creation process.
And it's interesting. I wanted to get your feedback on, I would say, real estate budgets. Or in general, how do you manage budgets right now? Cost is top of mind for many companies. And, reducing real estate footprint or extending real estate footprint has to come with some data to back this up. Or in general, both of you have, flexible programs that you're running also within, still having offices. So how do you think about this as a whole when you present to leadership? This is what we think that needs to be done to retain flexibility, but also being mindful of cost. So I wanted to get your thought process on how do you decide, should we have an office? Should we have a flex program? Should they be remote? Walk me through that process. Brittany, let's start with you.
When I first started, had this same question come up because it was very ad hoc and people were doing it all on their own. And we put together a policy around office acquisition and what parameters were we going to put into place that you had to follow in order to get any sort of access to any office space, co-working or dedicated. And we kind of took a look around and did some initial surveys with employees as well, and found that having at least 10 people in a location that were willing and wanting to go into an office 3 days a week were eligible to kick off any sort of discussion around a co-working office and a dedicated space to themselves. Anything prior to that we understood was a very individual need. And so we allowed them to go ahead and book co-working space ad hoc on their own expense and get that department budget approval. With that kickoff of that policy, we've kind of put in more parameters around once you hit a certain level of headcount and the data shows that you're going in regularly, we're going to have the conversation around the next level of office. And is it a bigger co-working space? Are we going to go into a sublease space, or are we going to go full direct lease? Recently, with kind of our ad of flexible bookings, we pulled data on what employees were submitting themselves and trying to get an understanding of what was being done ad hoc and also the needs of the business at this point in time. And we've had some recent changes where we want to bring people together in hubs like New York City for certain days throughout the month. And so having done the research on what that costs, we then presented this co-working flex option as an initial, like, here you go, you want 2 days a week, this is what it will cost. If we see that you start to, that upticks and we see that you're in 3, 4, 5 days a week, then I have data to go and start to share that it's actually necessary and more financially beneficial to us to get an actual office. So my relationship with finance is very super close. And when we go into market for any location, we do a full market analysis across co-working flex and sublease and direct to get a full understanding of what that looks like and what our headcount projections and plans look like for that location.
Very data-driven, extremely data-driven.
Very data-driven.
Love it. Charlotte, anything to add or ideas there?
Yes. So, I think for us, we've kind of been the past couple of years really reducing our real estate footprint. Prior to the pandemic, we were expanding in different markets, and the pandemic obviously put a pause on that. And then we really started to work on, during the years of the pandemic, really improving our remote work practices and our remote first model, and really focusing on that. And a big part of that is access to flexible space. Not everyone can work successfully from home. And so that's a really important aspect and really well-utilized component of our work ecosystem is people have it's like a flex booking model that we use, on-demand bookings, globally, and that works really well for our team members. We get a lot of really good engagement and feedback with that. And then for our, real estate portfolio, we made an early decision to cut back and reduce our footprint in the locations where we already had offices. So retaining those office spaces, but just making them a lot smaller under the assumption that, we're going to see lower office utilization on a day-to-day basis. And we're actually continuously in the process now of thinking about how we can further evolve those spaces to better align with how they're being utilized. So earlier this year, we did this massive study of our in-person gatherings and really tried to look at which groups are coming into the offices, for which purposes, how many people are, coming in for each type of gathering, what types of spaces do we need? We really know that we need these flexible spaces that can be reconfigured and flex up and down, because sometimes we have really large groups, but other days the office is a little more empty. And so we want it to be a focus space for the folks that are there. So it's really, our long-term view is we see this scalable model where we have these offices that act as gathering centers for our distributed workforce that are really optimized for different types of on-sites. And that decision that we made to really orient our workplaces that way was based around that data that we gathered about how our teams are already gathering and how we expect that to continue in the future based on our headcount growth.
I love it. This is so interesting. One, again, like the data piece and intentionality. And really, I think it's pretty much aligned with how you described your workplace strategy in terms of the intentionality of bringing people together in office. Do you see this as well in terms of, I would say, different types of usage for your offices and even trying to configure it differently, like Charlotte mentioned?
We do. Every office is slightly unique, based off of the utilization and the needs of that department or set of employees in that location. For example, our Dallas office is a hub for sales, and we have found they're bringing everybody together there on at least a monthly basis for sales enablement and boot camps. And so when we had the space coming up on lease, we searched for locations that could really fully support that training aspect for that department and for that location. So this new space that we have has a dedicated training room for 50 employees, along with an attached additional all hands kind of multi-purpose space that we use for all of our company events that we host in office, and we're bringing meetups back in now. And so we're taking what each department and the main departments there need and want, and what we're seeing them utilize it for, and building that into our next phase of the design and the real estate acquisitions.
And I think it's almost a natural progression to ask you about data. What data do you collect? How do you collect it? Is it mostly, both in terms of like the office that you're interested in to see, and also for flex, for remote, for all the programs? Like, what data is important to you to see that this is working, or to base your decisions to change, right? Charlotte, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I think, workforce data obviously is the foundation, understanding where our team members are, how those teams are going to grow and evolve in the future. If that's known, oftentimes at Upwork, we don't hire by location. And so it's really about sort of keeping a pulse on which, municipalities or locations are growing. And then figuring out how people are using flex space in that area is another important indicator. I think to Brittany's point, it's a really great model to sort of start to stand up these hubs when you see that you have a concentration of people coming in on a certain day. At the very minimum, I think you can, create community groups in that area through Slack channels or local champions. We also give employees a social stipend so that they can get together outside of work to kind of encourage those localized meetups. And we see a lot of people going into flex space and then going out for, lunch or what have you, going out for a drink after work, which is really cool. I think going back to your question about data, I think office occupancy is important. Badge data is helpful to understand how, groups are using the offices, and you can, break that down by team or location and figure out how folks are gathering. We also look at our, travel and expense data, and we're rolling out a new in-person gathering framework next year that we're piloting, which is going to be a partnership with admins and chiefs of staff to track offsites in a centralized way. And so that the workplace team can also act really as consultants too, and making sure that teams are, organizing those gatherings in a way that will be impactful and inclusive of people who cannot attend in person, those remote attendees, because one of the really interesting things that we found is that for the vast majority of even our gatherings that are organized to be in person, there's folks who can't make it. Maybe it's, a new parent who wants to stay home with their little one, or someone who's under the weather. And so it's really critical to be able to craft an agenda that works across, time zones. So that's something that we're going to be piloting next year, is really leaning on that partnership with the folks who are organizing those events to understand how often they're happening and for what reason and who's attending, and then figuring out how we can continue to evolve that program.
Love it. Brittany, how about you?
Very similar to Charlotte, the office utilization is a key data point and an easy one to pull. And we lean heavily on our platform to understand the themes of how our offices are being utilized, who's coming in, what departments. As well, my team has taken on what we've dubbed kind of a workplace business partner role within each office. So they work with their local leaders as part of this idea of destination first. Any leader that wants to host a QBR, a training, a team on-site, a team event, we're driving all of those requests to go through the workplace team, and then we support them in building out their agenda, planning the day, suggesting offsite locations because they are, the location experts, and continuing to support that destination first mentality that we have, and then adding on this layer of flex ad hoc, booking capability. We now can support locations in that same kind of vein, but when we don't have dedicated office space. So we've recently just hosted 2 teams out here on the East Coast. We have no East Coast offices, but we supported their on-site events for 1 or 2 days in flex space, and driving that all through this new kind of policy and platform.
Great. There are a few questions in the audience. I have so many questions for you, but there are amazing questions from the audience that I do think would be really interesting to address. One is in terms of engagement, both in terms of getting some ideas in how to drive collaboration and engagement in office, like what specific programs are you doing, those on-sites, off-sites, and also what virtual and engagement, I would say, things they're doing for your remote population, especially when someone was asking also that, Jesse was asking that virtual events have lower and lower attendance. So how do you keep this high and, valuable? Because I remember, in the start of the pandemic, it's like, oh, let's do, I don't know, something together on Zoom, and by the end, like you cannot see it anymore. You just don't want to do it anymore. So I think first question is, what activities do you do on site? What programs? And 2 is, what do you do virtually, and how do you keep engagement high there? Who wants to start?
I'm happy to start. So it's a great question, first of all, and I think, I'd be curious to learn what's working for everyone on the call too. I think that for Upwork, we are very grounded in our remote first sort of centering to our culture and our operations. And so we really think of, when we think of a culture or engagement initiative, we really try to think virtual first, remote first. And so I think, to your point though, Zoom happy hours, everyone's over Zoom happy hours, right? So I think for us, we're really trying to focus on fewer, more impactful events, and then ensuring that there's consistent open channels for like informal socialization. So I think Brittany mentioned, manager training, and I think that's such an important call out, because the skill set to be a successful remote manager is a little bit different than it is to be an in-person manager. And I think one of the things that we've tried to do is create resources for managers about how they can create those kind of collaborative, fun, engaging environments within the context of their team. And we've had, some teams at Upwork do successful things like an open Friday coffee chat, that's just optional, but drop in if you have free time on your calendar, and you don't talk about work, you just maybe talk about your plans for the weekend. And, if leaders are there and they're showing up in different time zones and they're, making time for their team, it goes a long way towards building that trust and helping to maintain that informal social connection. So I think, we're really looking at a balance of those very intentional, very impactful virtual events, for example, for our belonging communities, really helping people sort of find their people, and make those connections and feel a sense of belonging. And then when we think about in-office events, we really think about them as sort of ancillary. I think all of our cultural events, we really try to focus and keep things as open and inclusive as possible, because Upwork is so distributed. We are, 80% distributed all around the world. And so although we do have hundreds of people who live near an office, we really think of that as sort of we want to create ways for them to sync up their time together on site and make the most of their time together on site. But when we host any type of company-wide event, it's always going to be virtual.
A lot of what Charlotte was saying resonates with me and what our team is doing here at Harness. I think we're all very tired of the games on Zoom and the virtual just sit here and have a mocktail cocktail. It was great and it made such an impact in the pandemic, but everyone wants a bit more meaning behind their connections and their engagement. And so similarly, we focus on kind of a hybrid mix of both. And my workplace team and I work very closely with our people operations team and our people experience team member who's driving a lot of DEIB and celebrations and recognition. So we kind of partner our virtual events and our in-office events along with that team for much of that. We do an in-office event once a month. It's called a social hour. It's sometimes in the middle of the day. It's sometimes towards the end of the day. We try to make it as flexible as possible and offer various different offerings to cater to different employees. We also, while we try to keep everything as consistent as possible for all of our office spaces, we are focused on also celebrating and recognizing very local culture and local events and needs for each office as well. We also have started to really focus on the fact that we are a global company. And so when we do events or company meetings that are recorded, we then do a replay session and make that an event for the teams that were unable to make it due to time zone constraints. And so that has been a really great win for us that has not only made them feel included and engaged, but has felt as though we really are wanting them to have been part of this with us versus previously it was simply you could ask for the recording link and watch it on your own. So while that worked, it is, and it's a much bigger kind of calendar of events now that we've added all these items, but it is truly, I think, becoming such a more equitable way of engaging when things happen in office and those remote employees as well.
Amazing. Thank you both. I think it was just incredible insights. I just see all the questions. I wish we could talk for hours, seems like, on this. Thank you for your insights, for your candid answers on what's working, what's not working. It's all an iterative process and it feels like we're all in this together. So it's phenomenal. Thank you everyone who joined us, and see you next time on our next Coffee with Gable. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.